And Daryl, we were talking before the break about Hey Hey Saturday, the years that you were with Ozzy Ostrich, of course, which was Ernie Carroll. How many years did you actually work together, all up?
23.
23 years. Is he still in the entertainment industry, or is he retired fully now?
He's retired and donated the ostrich to the Performing Arts Museum in Melbourne. Yes.
So Ozzy sits somewhere in a museum now?
He does, and ironically, a couple of years back, I was deputy chair of Screen Sound, which is our national audio visual archive in Canberra, on the Council for Screen Sound, Advisory Council, and we launched this Sights and Sounds exhibition, and Ozzy was on loan from the Melbourne Performing Arts Museum to Screen Sound in Canberra. And so I'm standing next to this glass case, and inside was Ozzy sitting on a chair, propped up. Ernie's arm was not still in the ostrich, but it was propped up on a chair, and it was really weird. I kind of wanted to start talking to him.
It must be hard, because you were with Ozzy for a long time on the show. What was the reason for... Who created Ozzy? Why was he brought on the show?
It was Ernie. Ernie created Ozzy Ostrich in the middle 60s for a show called The Happy Show, the Tarak Show and The Happy Show, which were kids shows on Channel 9. And there was... I think it was to do with letters of the alphabet, or explaining different letters of the alphabet, and O for ostrich was, and he thought, well, if I had an ostrich, I could use that to, help with the letter O or so. And anyway, Wardrobe had one order for one ostrich, and it was made up, and Ernie worked the ostrich. The head sat on here, it was put on separately. The neck component sat on, it was normal sort of a sleeve, and that sat on the body of the ostrich. So Ernie actually sat beside Ozzy, and he worked off a monitor. He didn't look at me, he just worked off a monitor, and he worked like working in a mirror, and he would say, "Good day, Daryl, how are you?" And I was sort of where you are. So he would just work, that's the way he worked. And it was funny at times, because, if our host cameraman was not careful, he would, the framing was a little erratic, you would get part of Ernie.
Now, Daryl, we need to talk about you. We were talking about Hey Hey Saturday. We've just lost Ozzy Ostrich. Ernie Carroll just left.
End of 94.
At the end of 94, you moved on. The show was very, very popular. It still is, obviously, if it's still on air today. You had some characters on there. I reckon your show probably developed and created stars of the future. Who are some of the people that came out of Hey Hey that made it after that? Some of the actors, some of the singers?
A lot of the people, I think when we started doing Red Faces, even though it was tongue-in-cheek, and a send-up of the original New Faces, which was the original talent program that started on Channel 9 back in 1963 in Melbourne. We, in Red Faces, we had a lot of people come through, and a lot of them had their tongues firmly planted in their cheek, and which was the right attitude, because if you came on thinking, this is my big break, it was going to be unfortunate for you, because, you had Red, who was ready to tear you to shreds and whatever, and other judges. But in the early days, we had Rob Sitch, we had all the D-Generation people came through the show. We had Mark Downey came on and did an impression of a dog.
The band 1927, I'm sure they came on Red Faces.
Yes, it was actually, what happened was the guitarist, and not the name's gone now, but the guitarist, a guy came on, played guitar and sang, and the band rang up and asked if he would contact them, and he became the lead singer and guitarist with 1927. And so a lot of things like that happened. Raymond J. Bartholomew, who Brian and Curvis, really, he's a great talent, Brian, really great talent, as a comedian and actor, and he's got a lovely rubbery face and lovely tragic look, and it really works well for him comedy-wise. Yes, he works in Melbourne. He was actually a teacher, but he turned to comedy, and he became our poet laureate, and so we'd have him in, and he used to do a thing called Days by the Ocean. And there was a little 5.5-year-old boy in Sydney that just was enamoured with Raymond J. He got the beret and everything, and so he came on the show, and we, little Matt, can't remember his second name, but Matt did Days by the Ocean in his own right and became as famous as Raymond J. But there are a lot of people that had a start on Red Faces and then moved on and became, bigger in other areas. But Annette Law, who was a comedian, started and worked a lot. But I mean, a lot of people that talking now, you would forget these people, but they had a career for a few years after being on Hey Hey. Yeah.
Now, Daryl, the day that Channel 9 decided that was it for Hey Hey, so how did it happen? Run us through quickly how it all happened for you.
Well, it was very interesting because earlier in the year I started working on a website, always thinking towards the future of the show and what we'd do the following year, and it was reasonably early as far as people taking the web seriously. But I thought because of the interactive nature of Hey Hey, Hey Hey site would be fabulous because we'd get funny photos from expats overseas, we'd get all this, it would be just terrific in terms of feeding material through the show. And then there were all these ideas I had of having like Harry Connick perform on the show and then saying, look, Harry's got to go, but he's going to be in the chat room for 10 minutes. And you can also, by the way, if you go through to online, retail thing, you'll get a special deal on his new album. And there are a million things that I had ideas for this site. So I started spending a lot of money on the site. And then Channel 9 Sydney executive rang, David Leckie. He was heading the network, and he rang and said, we're going to have a meeting and think. Anyway, he cancelled that meeting, then we rescheduled for another time, and he cancelled that meeting, and I thought, what's happening? So I rang Ian Johnson, who I knew very well at Channel 9, and said, Ian, is something happening that I don't know about because I'm spending a lot of money on this website for the following year, and we'll bring it in probably later this year if all goes well. And he said, oh, look, yeah, I can't sort of say anything or whatever. Anyway, finally, after he cancelled 3 meetings, we finally had the meeting, and I was going to table all these new ideas for the following year. And he suddenly said, look, it's a boardroom decision we've made. We're cancelling the show, and we'll be cancelling Sale eventually too. We're going to rule off for the new millennium and start again. If the show had not been rating, I could understand it, but the show was still rating. But there were certain politics going on behind the scenes that I was not overly aware of that decreed the show would go, and of course soon afterwards Sale went too, and I thought, well, they really are going to rule off. But what they did, or what they didn't do, was rule off and have something in their minds that was going to actually replace those two shows.